Nick Saban called it the biggest mistake of his career. We're talking about it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. We got an early line on LSU-Clemson. I know we're 8 months away, but figured we'd share it with you anyway. Another member of the LSU support staff is leaving the football program, but we start with what Nick Saban calls the biggest mistake of his coaching career. And since this is Locked on LSU, you can guess where Nick Saban went with that. So I'll give you a little background first. Saban was a guest on The Pivot. If you're not familiar, The Pivot is co-hosted by former LSU Tiger Ryan Clark, who played for Saban at LSU in the 2000 and 2001 seasons. RC got to LSU in 1997 under DiNardo, 3 years under DiNardo, 2 under Saban. And then former Florida Gators Channing Crowder and Fred Taylor. Crowder, it's worth noting, was part of the 2003 Florida team that beat LSU, the only loss LSU had in the national championship season. And then Nick Saban, when he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, drafted Channing Crowder. So there's a lot of familiarity with the men in that room as they're doing this show. And very candidly, I love The Pivot. It's something that I listen to and or watch regularly. I think they do an amazing job. This is sort of a random aside, but you may not know this. Before Ryan Clark started doing The Pivot, he did another podcast called Face First, which I produced for him in our 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge studios. It was maybe about a year run on Face First. But it's similar in that it was just candid conversations. The Pivot is different because they bring on enormous guests. And it's pretty incredible over the past several years how The Pivot has grown. And I'm thrilled for those guys because it really is an amazing accomplishment. And the fact that all of these A-list names in sports and entertainment want to come on the show is just a testament to the job they do and the inroads that they had made as a place where people can go have very candid, fun conversations. So if you don't watch The Pivot regularly, I would recommend you do. I love it. I think it's awesome. So Tuesday, snow day in Baton Rouge, and lo and behold, pops up into my feed that The Pivot dropped the Nick Saban episode. So naturally, I watched it. And the thing that struck me is the thing that struck a lot of people, and you've seen this go around a good bit. And if you haven't heard it yet or seen it, I'll play the audio for you. Nick Saban was asked by Ryan Clark if he would do anything differently in his career. That's how this was set up. And Nick Saban points at Channing Crowder and says, "You're not going to like this." Because, of course, Nick was at Miami when they drafted Channing Crowder. And then he picks it up here.
Not because we didn't have success in Miami, because I enjoyed coaching in Miami. But I found out in that experience that I like coaching in college better because you could develop players personally, academically, athletically, and all that a little more than in pro ball. Even though I love the status of coaching in pro football and the kind of guys you coached and you're coaching in the best league against the best players, I loved all that. So then I can't go back to LSU, go to Alabama, and no disrespect to Alabama. It's not Alabama versus LSU. It's just Jimmy Sexton stood on the balcony when I was getting ready to leave LSU and make a decision about whether I went to Miami or stayed at LSU. And he said, "What do you want your legacy to be as a coach? Do you want to be Vince Lombardi or do you want to be Bear Bryant?" And without hesitation, I said Bear Bryant. And he said, "What are you doing going to Miami then?" That's the truth. I don't know if I ever told that story, but that's the truth. We, outside of Skip Bertman's office, on the balcony, and I went anyway.
All you can do now is laugh because history is written. But Nick Saban's own words, biggest mistake of his career was leaving LSU. The rest of the conversation was fascinating. And he talked about wanting to go to the Dolphins or go to the NFL. You heard him say it there. You know, the sort of the cachet of coaching in the best league with the best players, but realized he was a college coach. And so he went back into the college game and he went back to Alabama. Nick Saban is always going to be a controversial part of LSU's football history because, and it's much easier to talk about this now with Nick no longer coaching because he's no longer a threat to LSU and no longer at Alabama. But he's a complicated part of LSU's football history because he is singularly responsible for birthing what LSU football is. But he also singularly held LSU back from even greater heights, which is sort of the irony. He built the thing and then suppressed the thing he built. I view it only through my lens. I can't view it through the lens of someone younger or older than me. Someone younger who maybe didn't get to enjoy watching what Nick built probably doesn't have as strong of feelings toward Nick Saban. Someone older than me, who maybe would value the loyalty piece more, maybe has a tougher time appreciating Nick because he left. What I can tell you from my experience is I was a student at LSU during Nick's years. I graduated high school in 2000. So my first collegiate football season was the 2000 football season, Nick's first in Baton Rouge. And I graduated LSU in 2004. So I was a senior at LSU when LSU won its first national championship in 45 years, something many of us thought would never, ever happen. And it's so strange to think of it now like that. But that's the reality is when you go 45 years and you don't even really get close, you believe that that's like a forbidden land. That's for other programs. That's not for us. And it's so hard to put yourself back into the mindset. But, I think of it through the prism of watching, my first recollections of LSU football, late 80s and then into the 90s. I love the 1995 Bring Back the Magic game because LSU finally broke through and beat Auburn. And you finally got to a bowl game where they beat, incidentally, Nick Saban's Michigan State team in the 95 Independence Bowl. But it puts into context where the program was relative to where the program is now, what the expectations are. Well, Nick built those expectations. 1996 and 1997, LSU was the SEC West co-champion. But they lost a head-to-head to Alabama in 96 and lost a head-to-head to Auburn in 97, so didn't get to Atlanta. Just getting to Atlanta felt like forbidden fruit. So when Nick got LSU there in 2001 and they won it, it was euphoric. And then 2 years later to win a national championship it's just hard to explain to someone who has watched LSU now win it in 07, play for it again in 11, win it in 2019 in such dominating fashion, and now that be the expectation every year. It's so hard to explain, to understand what the feeling of the program was when Nick got here in November of 1999. So I have forever appreciation for Nick Saban. I think LSU should have a statue of Nick Saban outside of Tiger Stadium, along with Paul Dietzel and Les Miles and Ed Ogeron. All the championship coaches should be out there. But I also think of it sort of in terms of what happened with Paul Dietzel. And this is a part of LSU's football past that often doesn't get told. But Paul Dietzel, of course, was the national championship winning coach for the 1958 team. And he left LSU for Army. He left for a better job, even though he won a national championship here. And he went on to be the coach and athletic director at South Carolina. Incidentally, his first year at South Carolina, he had to play LSU, which was a game he scheduled while he was at LSU and then ended up having to play it on the other end. But No doubt in those times, Paul Dietzel leaving had to leave some bitter feelings. But Paul Dietzel came back to Baton Rouge and was a staple around Baton Rouge. He lived in Baton Rouge the remainder of his life. He died in Baton Rouge, and he's revered at LSU. And I think the same should be true for Nick Saban. Now, Saban went on and won 6 national titles at your division rival. Paul Dietzel didn't have success anywhere else. So there is that component of it. But I think you have to be able to acknowledge and appreciate the success that Nick had in Baton Rouge and forever honor that success and appreciate what he did here. You can hate the fact that you lost to him all those years, and that sucked. I mean, there's no way around it. But it doesn't wipe away, eliminate, negate, or mute the importance of the 2003 championship, instilling a belief in this program that you can win championships at LSU, which is why Les and Ed and hopefully Brian Kelly will go on to do it in Baton Rouge because of what Nick Saban, the path that Nick Saban paved. There was another comment Nick made. There was plenty in the pivot that was amazing. He talked about his relationship with Bill Belichick and coaching with Belichick. Had some amazing conversations throughout. But one other thing he talked about is if he would ever coach again. And I want to get to that. You'll hear it next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now, it's playoff time. And there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right. 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, all about the hot takes. This week on Prize Picks, you want to look at the NFL playoffs. You could do it. How about JD5? More on his passing yards? Great way to look. It's been great so far. If you're ready to run your game this football season, download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. So Nick Saban not only called leaving LSU his biggest mistake, he also was asked if he ever would coach again. I'll get to that in just a second. But there is, Nick Saban kind of is responsible for 2 of the greatest what ifs, certainly in Louisiana sports. And I might argue 2 of the greatest what ifs in the NFL and college football history. I'm not big into hyperbole, but hear me out on this one. So, obviously, if Nick Saban would have never left LSU, then he doesn't go on to win 6 national titles at Alabama, becoming the greatest coach in the history of college football. Now, how many titles might he have won at LSU? That's a great question. Certainly, they were loaded, and a giant piece of the roster that Les Miles had that early success with was recruited by Nick Saban and his staff: Jamarcus Russell, Matt Flynn, Jacob Hester, Glenn Dorsey, Kyle Williams, Andrew Whitworth. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I mean, and listen, Les Miles deserves credit for continuing to recruit and to develop. But you can't ignore the fact that Nick had laid the foundation and handed Les Miles a roster with an incredible amount of talent. As a matter of fact, my buddy Hunt Palmer over at LouisianaSports.net shared this stat. When Nick Saban left Baton Rouge after the 2004 season, he left Les Miles a roster that had as many first-round draft picks as Auburn has produced since 2006. Say that another way. The roster that Nick handed Les Miles, the players that Les Miles inherited, there were as many first-rounders on that team than what Auburn has produced from 2006 to the present day in nearly 20 years. That one team. Pretty incredible what Les Miles inherited. That was large part thanks to Nick. So that was part of it. Number one is the what if with Saban had he stayed. Bama doesn't win 6. How many does LSU win? The other part, though, as we know, is Drew Brees. And Nick did tell the Drew Brees story where he actually included Dr. James Andrews, where Dr. James Andrews cleared Drew Brees, said Drew Brees would be fine. But Dante Culpepper was the one that he was worried about because he would need his mobility the way he played. He played, and Andrews said that Culpepper would not get back to the level he was at before. But the Miami Dolphin team doctors are the ones that would not pass Drew Brees on his physical. So if Brees had passed the physical in Miami, does Nick Saban stay in Miami? And does he win a Super Bowl in Miami with Drew Brees? And then, of course, Drew Brees never comes to New Orleans. And what does that make of the Saints? Are the Saints even still in Louisiana? Great question about some of the what ifs that are all interwoven with that decision Nick Saban made back in 2004 when he left Baton Rouge for Miami. Now, there was also the question of whether or not he would coach again. And Channing Crowder kind of pressed him if he would ever coach again. And Nick Saban was pretty transparent on that answer as well.
I love coaching pro ball. I mean, and if I was going to coach today, based on the circumstances in college and in the NFL, I would coach in the NFL because all those things in college have changed. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of what college used to be is not there anymore. I mean, it used to be you went to college to develop value for your future. Now people are going to college to see how much money they can make. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you change the whole dynamic of the importance of getting an education, making good decisions and choices about what you do and what you don't do to create value for your future. You change that whole dynamic. And the idea that these guys are free agents twice a year and they can just go wherever they want. I mean, I got NFL coaches calling me complaining about these guys have no ability to sustain and persevere and overcome adversity because they never had to do it. They just pack up and leave as soon as something doesn't go their way. That's what I always enjoyed about college, developing those things that help guys be successful. Mm-hmm. And now the system has changed where that's not even possible anymore. And I think the players should get paid in college. I really do. I just think the system that we're doing it in is not really beneficial to them and their development in the future.
Y'all know how I feel about it. The only people inconvenienced by players being able to jump ship, as he said, become a free agent twice a year and make all the money, the only people inconvenienced are coaches trying to build rosters. And when you're Nick Saban and you're making $11, $12, $13 million a year, just don't have a lot of sympathy for you. But that's why, in part, he left. But it was interesting saying if he went back to coach again, he would coach in the NFL, not in college. But something else he talked about, and I would highly recommend you go watch. It's an hour and 15 minutes. I would highly recommend you go find time to watch the full episode of The Pivot. But he said there's only one way he knows how to do it, as intensely as he does. And he was thinking in 2023, like this might kill him. Like literally, he said it was a hard season. They had some struggles. Staff probably wasn't as good. And he said, I don't know how to do it any other way, and this may kill me, which is a big reason why he stepped away. And then he also said, doing TV has kept him close to the game, which he said he couldn't just sit around and do nothing. He's got to do something, so it keeps him active. So the fact that he's doing TV keeps him close to the game, and he's not having to obviously have the strain and stress that he did when coaching in this era. So highly unlikely we see Nick Saban coach again. But as you heard him say there, if he did, it would be in the NFL. They did ask specifically about the Dallas Cowboys. He said, no, he wants to see Deion Sanders get that job. We'll see if it happens for Coach Prime. Okay, it is Locked on LSU. We had an opening line for LSU and Clemson, and an LSU staffer has left the program. We'll get to that to wrap up next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, it can improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule, that can be challenging. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. And as a listener to this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80. That's space 80. To match with a licensed therapy today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. Another member of Brian Kelly's support staff has left. Dr. Matt Frakes made the announcement on social media on Tuesday that he's leaving the program. It's a brief statement. I'll read it to you. He said, Baton Rouge, I said, thank you, Baton Rouge, for the love you showed me and my family for 3+ years. I put my heart and spirit into everything I did for our players, the staff, and LSU. Thank you for allowing me to change what performance nutrition looks like for our athletes, the field, and the community. Stay blessed and know the amazing food, nutrition, and culture is another minor detail that makes you special forever. LSU, signed Dr. Frakes. If you're not familiar with Matt Frakes, so Dr. Frakes was the associate AD for sports nutrition at LSU. He's from Columbus, Ohio. He got both his undergrad and his master's at Bowling Green, and then he went to Ole Miss where he got his doctorate. And it was at Louisville, and then joined Brian Kelly's staff at Notre Dame in 2021, and then came with Brian Kelly from South Bend to Baton Rouge in 2022. He did have a brief stint as well at ULL while he was finishing his doctorate. So a lot of familiarity with the South at Ole Miss, at ULL, now at LSU, but from Columbus, Ohio, and had gone to Bowling Green. We look at the support staff, and I think what's interesting is, you're seeing a lot of the people that Brian Kelly had brought with him from South Bend are no longer here. We talked about Brian Polian, who he was brought in as his recruiting coordinator, and that lasted a year. A guy like Kerry Cooks, who came over and was the DB's coach, and is no longer here at LSU. You look at some of the support staff members, Dr. Frakes, who we talked about there. I mean, Brian Kelly's chief of staff, who he brought in with him, who had been with him every step of the way, who's no longer here as well. It's interesting because I don't know if there's anything maybe that's underlying there. Like a lot of people ask, so the chief of staff was Beth Rex, and part of the reason Beth left was when Austin Thomas came in, they were effectively redistributing some of Beth Rex's responsibilities to Austin, and she made the decision that she was leaving. And I think what you're seeing, I don't know anything. I don't know why Matt Frakes is leaving. I don't know. I have not yet I've asked. I have not gotten confirmation yet. I don't know if this was his decision, if he was let go. I have no idea. So I want to be very clear if he's got another job. If you want to read between the lines, the announcement he made was one of those like social media graphics, and it did have LSU on it. So it kind of leads you to believe that maybe it was done by LSU. So it was amicable. I don't know. Again, I'm just guessing there. But what is interesting is more and more of the ties that bound Brian Kelly to Notre Dame and the staff he brought here are being severed. And he really is transforming this program, not so much as an extension of what he was at Notre Dame, instead of what he is building now at LSU. And he's got really his fingerprint on everything here now. So Dr. Matt Frakes leaving. And look, Dr. Matt Frakes wasn't just the Associate AD for sports nutrition for football. He handled all 20 sports. So that's going to be interesting to see what they do kind of to replace there. One other quick note before we get out of here. FanDuel, who's obviously a great partner here on the show, posted some early betting lines for some of the marquee games at the beginning of the 2025 season. For example, Alabama 7.5 over Florida State. Texas opens up at Ohio State. They got Ohio State 4.5. Notre Dame 2.5-point favorite at Miami. Auburn 1.5 at Baylor. Tennessee 13.5-point favorite neutral site in Atlanta over Syracuse. South Carolina 8.5-point favorite neutral site in Atlanta over Virginia Tech. But there's LSU at Clemson, and our friends over at FanDuel have Clemson an early 2.5-point favorite. Now we are 8 months away from this football game, and it is somewhat silly to start thinking in terms of that so early. But effectively what that tells you is FanDuel views both LSU and Clemson as pretty much even and on level ground, because if you figure 3 points for home field advantage, if this were a neutral site game, it would be a virtual pick of maybe LSU by 0.5 point. And so if LSU were the home team, you'd figure LSU would probably be 2.5, 3, somewhere along there. So in any event, these two teams are very similar. You know, one of the narratives that we talked a lot about going into this year's opener was how LSU and USC were basically carbon copies. You had redshirt junior quarterbacks who were getting an opportunity to start for the first time, replacing Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, two good offenses with historically bad defenses where they fired the defensive coordinator, new defensive coordinators coming in. Yeah, I mean, that was all the narrative all throughout the offseason. And you kind of look at LSU and Clemson similarly. They had very similar regular seasons. Clemson had a really fortunate break late in the season where Syracuse upset Miami. It allowed Clemson to get into the ACC championship game where they upset SMU and went to the college football playoff. What if Miami beats Syracuse and Miami's in the college football playoff and Clemson has another disappointing year where they're not in the playoff, but they do have Cade Klubnik back and they've got some talented players on the offensive side of the ball. It's going to be pretty fascinating to see how a remade LSU defense with a lot of transfers fares on the road at Clemson against that Clemson offense. Clemson will be bringing in a new defensive coordinator as well and a lot of turnover on the defensive side. Like I said, we got 8 months to talk about LSU and Clemson, but just file that away. The early line from our friends over at FanDuel have Clemson 2.5-point home favorite over LSU. So if you like the Tigers and you think the LSU Tigers and you think that line may move, might be a good opportunity to get in on it now before it goes in LSU's favor. Might be the best value that you get in favor of LSU if you're getting 2.5 points to bet it now, because got a feeling the more people pay attention to LSU throughout spring and the build up to the season, and the more they really peel back the layers of the onion of what LSU added in the transfer portal and how they fortified that defense and having Garrett Nussmeier back and what they added at the skill positions at tight end and receiver, have a feeling we might see some pretty significant line movement in that game. But again, we've got 8 months to talk about it. In the meantime, do me a favor. If you're new, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, Facebook. We're not on Facebook, excuse me. Sometimes I say that out of habit from a different show that I do. If you're listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review. And on YouTube, as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.